Alright, we got a challenge for this video. Let's see if I can make it all the way through without getting sued by Disney for mentioning one of their Star Wars characters. Today we are talking about the only V6 muscle car worth owning, a car that struck fear into the hearts of its V8 contemporaries, a car that made Camaros, Mustangs, heck, even Corvettes tuck their tails and run for the hills. Before getting into things, we're trying to make a video on cars every single day, so drop a comment with what our next why you should buy video should be so we can figure things out. We've got ideas, but would rather do the cars that you want to hear about. See, the 1980s was not a great time for muscle cars. Rising insurance costs, rising fuel costs, absolutely anemic motors from the oil crisis era 1970s, arguably pretty rough styling, the list goes on and on. Well, the 80s was a pretty darn rad generation for music that we can't use in this video without getting demonetized. It was pretty darn awful for car enthusiasts. That is, with one pretty notable exception. There was a car company that was, up until this point, and forever after this point, known for making the car your grandmother drove to church on Sunday in. The car that cut you off and then cruised at 15 under in the left lane. The car that, other than a few standout classics, no one really ever cared about. Yep, we're talking about Buick. Now, the muscle car enjoyers among you may already know what car I'm talking about, but for those who don't, today we're touching on one of my personal favorite cars ever, and one of arguably the coolest cars of all time, the Buick Grand National. The Grand National can draw its roots all the way back to 1975, where Buick engineer Don Baker got his hands on a Garrett turbo for use on a Boy Scout Explorer project car that used a Skylark as its base. Now, that car got built and it piqued some interest over at Buick headquarters, namely from their chief engineer Lloyd Roos? I don't know.
Lloyd Roos.
Lloyd saw this turbocharged Skylark and didn't see just a one-off project. He saw the rebirth of the Buick line and a rise to glory. Needless to say, around 2 weeks later, engineers were all gathered around meeting to put this thing into production. Initially, things started with Lloyd pitching a turbo V6 Indy pace car that eventually ran in the 1976 Indianapolis 500, and around 2 years later in '78, Buick's first turbocharged engine came to fruition in the Regal Sport Coupe. Putting down 165 horsepower through a carbureted turbocharged engine, the Sport Coupe was something of a proof of concept available to the mass market. As the years went by, the power output kept increasing as the Buick boys turned the boost way up, until eventually the topic of this video came along, the Grand National. Now, originally the Grand National was just an appearance package for the base Regal, with the 1982 model coming with just 125 ponies out of a naturally aspirated V6, but some of those 1982s were based on the Buick Sport Coupe with the turbocharged engine, and suddenly an idea came along. In 1984, Buick blew the top off the Grand National package and released the Grand National we know and love today, launching the car with a badass commercial that we have to mute to not speedrun a copyright strike. The Grand National package now came with the turbocharged, fuel-injected, 200 horsepower, 3.8 liter V6 that we all know the car for. And the best part, you could have the Grand National in any color you wanted as long as it was black. Buick stated that they wanted a sinister, Darth Vader, Disney, please don't sue me look for the car, and man did they ever achieve it. The Grand National became an absolute menace on the streets even in its first year. It clicked off the quarter mile in stock trim in 15.9 seconds, just 0.7 behind the Corvette, and far ahead of the Camaro of the time. Meanwhile, the aftermarket was already getting their hands on Grand Nationals, turning up the boost and blasting down the quarter in 13 seconds. For comparison, a C8 Corvette runs the quarter in 11:20. This would be like if there was a Buick on the market that you could slap a tune and downpipe on and run in the deep 9s. That's how unheard of this car was. Well, leave it to Buick to not leave well enough alone. In '86, they cranked the boost up even more, making 235 horsepower, up from the original 200 and 330 pound-feet of torque. This was achieved with some modifications to the engine, but more importantly, the addition of an air-to-air intercooler. At this point, the Grand National was running 0 to 60 in 490 and the quarter in 1390. It was faster than the Countach. It was faster than the US market Ferraris. It was blowing Corvettes, Camaros, Fox bodies, you name it, out of the freaking water. And there was nothing any manufacturer could do about it. Simply put, the Grand National was the baddest motherfucker on the streets at the time. Now, as with all good things, they had to come to an end. In '87, the Grand National was slated for its final year of production to be replaced with front-wheel drive econo-boxes as Buick cut cost and appealed to a broader market. But Buick simply couldn't let this legendary coupe go out without a bang and released the absolute baddest of the Buicks ever made to this day, the Grand National GNX. Buick partnered up with ASC and McLaren to build these and made them even faster than the already lightning-fast Grand National. The turbo was upgraded to a bigger unit, the exhaust unrestricted, the suspension was dialed in to precision and fitted up with larger 16-inch wheels. The bodywork got a bunch of notable badges and vents to denote that this Buick was awful special. They built 547 of these 276 horsepower turbocharged monsters, and each one has its own individual serial number. While writing this script, I looked up how much these sell for nowadays and was almost physically sick. I suggest you do the same. Badass cars, absolutely batshit crazy pricing, $250,000. Oh my god. Anyway, Jake, you spent the last however many minutes this has been telling me all about the history car, but should I buy one? What the f? Yes, absolutely. If you can afford to go buy one right now, heck, buy two and give me one. The Grand National is a special car because it really was the progenitor of modern turbocharged cars. It was the first American car to really successfully implement turbocharging as a performance-boosting upgrade, and even to this day, these cars have huge aftermarket support, and there are people out there building them into absolute monsters. Bolt-ons aren't going to make this thing a beast the way they will a modern car, but the stock bottom end is good for around 500 wheel horsepower, showing how wildly over-engineered these cars were for the 1980s. Now, we're a wheel company, so we have to talk wheels and tires. If you put something aftermarket on a GNX, we're gonna slap you. Keep it OEM. But if you have a Grand National, things are fair game. The stocks are actually pretty darn cool on these, but if you're looking for an upgrade, a drag setup is probably the way you're gonna go. Welds or forged stars are the right move here, wrapped up in some Mickey Thompson tires, ET Streets for the rear and front runners for the front. Want something for the street? Well, American Racing or US Mag is probably gonna be the route you should take. They'll fit the Grand National great and give it a period correct look. So, if you enjoyed this video, if you want to buy a Grand National, drop a comment down below, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends, buy us a Grand National. As I said earlier in the video, we're trying to put out a video every single day for you guys, so if you have suggestions on what video we should make, drop it down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.